subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
Hi guys, so today we have Sherin Istar with us, and this is a wonderful kind of experience we will have with all our students who are trying to attempt their regulation exam in the upcoming quarters, right? And Sherin have scored an unbelievable score, which is 94 out of 100. So who all watching the video, guys, you must understand that CPA is a percentile based score. So when I tell 94, I think Sherin have got 94 percentile. All right. So today we have Sherin. So all over to Sherin. So Sherin, how did you come to the CPA, being yourself into the chartered accountancy domain and straight away coming to the CPA? So why did you select CPA first?
Okay, so hi everyone. It's nice to meet everyone here. So I'm actually a chartered accountant from India, but I am moved to the US because I got married to a doctor here. So finally, when I thought about working, I thought the best prospects for work came with a local education, which is important here in the US. When you come with a chartered accountancy background, it's always better that it's first easier to still stick on to the same stream. So that is how I thought that CPA would be much easier rather than having to start with CFA or CMA or any other course. So that's how I got into CPA.
Okay, great. So guys, as you know, because we have conducted a webinar here, because Sherin is not in India, she shifted to US. So I think that's how we are interacting with Sherin, right? So Sherin, why did you select regulation section only first?
Okay, so for the four papers in CPA, regulation is the only paper which is completely new when you come from an Indian background of study, because the tax here is about the US federal taxation, which is completely new for an Indian chartered accountant. Because I wouldn't say that FAR or audit or BEC is new, because we have a little bit of understanding of it back then when we studied. But regulation is new, so I thought the first energy which I have, I should spend on this subject, because there's a lot of time and effort which we need to put in, because you're starting from scratch. So that's how I selected regulation first. And moreover, everything was in sync, because in Simandhar, they were actually doing a class on regulation for the first time. So we had a teacher called Dhanasri ma'am, who was taking classes in end of May. She started for end of May for about 15 to 20 days. So that actually thankfully coincided with my plan. So I could take regulation for the first time as the first paper.
Okay, so there is a myth that among all the CPA aspirants, regulation is considered to be one of the tougher sections, and followed by FAR, which is also very tough. So how do you think so? How do you rate regulation exam, and when you were preparing and all, and like when you went to the exam, how was the experience like? Because you doing the first time international exam, so how was it basically?
Okay, so regulation is, I wouldn't say it's a very easy paper, but it is a new paper. So it is tough, because it's something which you're learning from scratch as a new subject. So unless you learn or understand what the US taxation or understand the concepts behind it, you will not be able to crack this paper. But when I went for the exam, this being my first paper, I of course I was jittery, I was nervous, and I'm sure even when I go for the second paper, it'll still be the same. But the first is always it's a very nervous feeling back then. But yeah, I don't think the nervous feeling was just because of the subject. Nervousness was because it was a whole international. It is a completely different experience, because when you are writing a subjective paper, is different from when you have to write an MCQ or simulation paper. So these are two different things. Your practice also requirements are different. So that was the whole reason why I think that every candidate should be more prepared. The only one tagline which I can use is practice n number of questions. The more you practice, the more better it is, because without practicing, by just understanding the concepts, you're not going to reach anywhere. The more you practice, the better it is for you.
So Sherin, when you tell practice, now straightforward, we are coming to the question which students want to ask, right? So what was your strategy when you were preparing for the REG exam? Because scoring 94 is too much of a score to absorb for the candidates, right? So just wanted from the candidate perspective, what were the strategies and how did you plan? How many hours you used to study in a day? And what do you recommend that should be the number of hours one should put in on REG? Because we think that number of hours spent in should not have a correlation with the way we prepare, because it's the quality which is important than the quantity. Because a lot of times I see students spending 9-10 hours but getting no results. Then what is the things, which chapter to start first? Is it business law first, or is it like regulation R1, R2, or did you start from the back, or did you start from the front of the subjects? So how did you plan this exactly, and how many days it took for the preparation?
Okay, so like I said, I was lucky enough because the first time Simandhar hosted a webinar class for regulation, that was perfectly as per my plan, because it started towards the end of May, and by mid of June we had completed all classes for regulation. So after every class, during one class we used to have 3-4 modules of class being taken. I used to go back and listen to the lecture which is there in the Becker software. So, and after that, practice those MCQs for the particular module. So this was my plan. I made sure that this was done before I attend or sit for the next day's lecture. The reason why this is important is, one, by listening to one lecture, you get a gist of what is happening. By the second time you listen to another lecture of the same topic, you get more clear on the concept. And when you practice MCQs, then that's when you're cemented on the topic. So I think that was one of the strategies I used. So by the time it was June 17 or 20, somewhere around that time, I finished one time of how the book was, the review course, finished the book for the first time. If you ask me whether to start with tax or business law is of course very important, and there are a lot of similarities when it comes to Indian Contract Act and the Contract Acts which is there in this law. But and they have a few. There are definitely going to be questions from it, but the weightage of law is less than what is there for tax. So tax is a huge chunk which has more weightage. I started it in exactly the same order as it is there in the textbook. I did not study from the last part or the middle part. I started from 1 to 8. That is how I studied in the same order. If you ask me which topic is important, I will not say any particular topic is important, because this is unlike any CA or BCom exam where you have a choice question. There's nothing in choice. Every question is mandatory. You have to answer every question. So it is important, and every module, definitely there's going to be one question from it. So there's no particular module you can ignore. There's nothing that you can let go. You need to read. If you need to accumulate all those small points, you have to go through all those portions. But yeah, having said all that, you still have a few chapters which are important. Like in chapter 6, we have an ethics chapter for professional responsibilities and federal tax procedures. That is an important chapter because a lot of questions that come over from that particular topic. And business law.
Sorry to stop you there, because since I think we are not allowed as per the ethics rule to share the questions which come in the exam. So I'm sure, I think you would not share that also, what questions have been
No.
tested in the exam. But
Okay.
on a candidate's perspective, what do you think that they should strengthen their concepts on? What are some things where they should actually strengthen their concepts?
Okay, so on there are a few chapters like in chapters 3, 4, 5, where you have corporate versus partnership versus flow through entities. There are chances that you will get confused. So you need to be really strong on those concepts, understanding which is taxable, what is the basis, etc. So because these are heavily tested areas, and like how I mentioned in chapter 6 and chapter 7, 8, the business law, these are all heavily tested areas. So these, the more the number of questions, the more the number of scores that you will get. So when you know that these have heavy weightage, you need to concentrate more on those. And it's always better when you cook and sit back and make a note of how different a corporate is from a partnership, how different that is from another flow through entity. So that will help you in your study.
Did you draw something, or did you do a charts for this to
Yeah.
bifurcate and all?
So this, I kind of made a chart where I had all the different entities listed and what are the differences of each, and how the taxation works for each, how base is computed for each. So I made something for myself which I referred to on the previous day of the exam. And this is just one part of it, because there are even if you don't make notes, if you're and how you mentioned like the number of hours, I personally don't believe that the more number of hours you spend, the more marks you get. That is not how I believe it, because it's all about the number of quality hours that you put in. You can sit for 5 hours and still get a 90 plus, unless you are so it's all customized. It's person to person varies. So I definitely feel that if you have a strategy, go back, practice those MCQs, practice those skills practices. Then there are these AICPA mock sample papers, which is very important, not because the same questions will come, but because you know an idea of how the exam will look like, because it's exactly the same platform. Then there are these AICPA new questions which are released, which is again important because they're new, so you never know if they'll be tested or not. So I think there are multiple sources for which you can practice. It's all relying on us whether we have the time and we have the efforts to do it or not.
I think this is one of the fantastic points which you have said, like AICPA recently released questions. I think a lot of the candidates
Yes,
don't practice that because I think if you practice more of that, because you know exactly how the exam looks like, to
yes,
just have an experience of that. Though Becker have good mock tests, I think there are 3 to 4 mock tests inbuilt in the Becker software itself. I
yes,
think apart from the Becker, I think AICPA content is very important to practice the tutorials and all, right? So
yes,
how
correct.
do you, how a lot of these students also have one query, like we have 50% MCQs and 50% simulations. How
Yes.
does authoritative literature play an important role? Because it's an open book system in the 50% sense. So did you use that authoritative literature, and was it useful? Or do you think that, yes, we can read from the authoritative literature and we can answer that nicely because you have an open book system here?
So for MCQs, I don't think you have an authoritative literature. For simulations, you do have. For simulations, but honestly, at that point of time when you're all panicking, you I'm not really sure if you can spend a lot of time discovering where things are. So if you have a lot of time back when you're studying, and if you know that this is where you can refer to and this is where you can look forward for these points, then well and good. But for me, I honestly did not use authoritative literature when I did these exams. I just remembered what I studied and I took those exams. But there were questions where you had to use authoritative literature to answer those questions.
I think
So
that are
it was
research-based sense, I guess.
yes. So those questions will come for regulation. It is not like a surprise. It will come, and for me, it was difficult because to having to look through that authoritative literature, I for me, it was not an easy question. So there are those kind of questions that do come for regulation.
Okay. So what was your strategy on business law? Did you make the notes on business law apart from the Simandhar Becker and all? Did you also prepare your own notes to help you out with the business law section?
So I think business law was one subject where Peter Olinto in the law section, he does a very good job. I think he takes 1 hour per each module. So actually you can so there are totally 6 modules in chapter 7 and 6 in chapter 8. You can finish the entire revision in like 12 hours, because I heard that multiple times. For the laziness of having to read the textbook, I used to listen to that lecture multiple times. It was easy for me. Plus his skill practice has a 20-minute summarized version, which
Okay.
is very easy for me. On the previous day of the exam, I just listened to the same skill practice 20-minute summary, and I felt that was very helpful for the exam also.
Sharon, one question students have. So if there is no Simandhar or there is no Becker, person who have not purchased anything and all, so what do you recommend them? Can they still score? Is it important that we need to have a review provider also just to get the practice over it? Or do you think just by reading the book, you can just get in regulation above 90 and all?
So, okay, so I'm not very sure about other review courses, but for Becca, I can let you know that the examination platform looked very similar as to the practice sessions which were there in the software. So, like all those mock papers, simulation test 1, 2, 3, what are there in the Becker software, it replicated a lot similar to the ones which are there in the exam. The reason being they use the same methods, techniques, and those initial launch code, the confidentiality, etc. Whatever is there in an exam, you can see the same thing in the software. So which I think is very important, because you get an idea of how your exam is going to be. Okay, and even material per se, I think their material is really good because, because I didn't use any of the material. I just used the Becker material. And coming back to Simandar, my journey with for CPA was, it has got its own struggles, because one, you need transcripts from university. You had to get your evaluation done. There was a delay in all these aspects when it came for me. So transcripts, I think all the administrative work got done or taken care of really easily, because they have a very good team back in Simandhar who took care of all these aspects, and I didn't have to waste time on this. Even back for the evaluation, I had a confusion with regards to my evaluation, which is also sorted back by the team, because they went and dealt with people in the US asking if I will be eligible for the particular state or not. So a lot of work which I had to do as a student, which would take away a lot of my study time, that was taken care of by the team there. And now as they start conducting classes, like how I mentioned that we had webinars for regulation, and they right now have for FAR also, which is like, what better experience can you have when you have an Indian lecturer teach you on US subjects? So I think that is also a good thing to do.
I think the crowd will be telling like what Sripal is kind of pushing the students to kind of talk and vouch about Simandhar education. I
No,
think
that is not the truth, because I am a student who can vouch for it, because I went through that experience, and I know, because when you're in the US, it's not very easy to get your university reports or transcripts and all that. So I really appreciate the efforts put in behind it.
thank you so much, Sharon. So
Yeah.
now, one important thing what students are, I think, not getting up in regulation is some of the questions which are of basis related questions. What is C corp basis, S corp basis, or what is a trick to solve this basis related question? Do you need to practice more, or do you need to practice a lot of MCQs, or do you need to focus on the concepts? How does it work like? Because I think this is one of the most confusing part in REC. I'm pretty sure I think you have gone through that, right? So
So
how?
this is the most confusing, and I'll have to admit this is the heavily tested item also, because a lot of questions come from that portion. So this is where I mentioned that you need to make those. I made that summary of how a corporation worked versus how a partnership worked versus how a S corp works, how the taxation worked, how the basis is being calculated at different levels. So this is one area where the student has to focus on. You can attend those lectures, but even if you're conceptually you feel that you're strong, unless you practice MCQ, because basis questions are not asked just in MCQs, they're asked in simulations, because they can come as a full task-based simulation also. Two, and that too, not just one, 2 or 3 questions can come as a task-based simulation. So this is one area where it's not just enough that you need to be conceptually clear. You need to practice a lot of questions on it. And I think in Becker software, you have these unlimited practice tests also, which you can do. Yeah, which you can repeat and do, which will help you in understanding that portion more
What
clearly.
do you think? I think I have seen a lot of the students who are not scoring well in Becker mock test. They rather fail also in the main exam. Do you think
I'm
that?
one of that.
Okay.
I'm the person who failed in all the mock tests, but in an exam it came as a surprise that I got a 94, because I honestly cannot believe. Because on the previous day of the exam also I felt I forgot everything. After the exam, I had to admit that I came back home very disappointed, because I expected something much better. But then for me, the scores which got released 2 days back came as a surprise. So for all the students who are taking their papers, we are all at the same category. Don't worry about it. You might feel that you don't remember after the paper. You might think that you might fail. That was the same thing I thought. But then you will be surprised by the scores that come in if you have practiced enough.
It's like one day before the exam, can we study everything, or do we need to do some selective study? As you said that no, every module is important, and every chapter is important because international exams are set up in that manner. So just one day before the exam, what was your strategy? I mean, tomorrow, say for an example, is REG exam. What did you do today then?
So I did not focus on studying portions today. I just revised notes. I just revised those questions which I did wrong in MCQs. And like I mentioned, for law, I used to listen to those skill practice 20-minute videos. That was all. Because on the previous day, I didn't stress myself a lot on studying new topics. It was only revision of the old topics. So I don't think, because this is a different exam, you need a lot of concentration on the exam. So you cannot stress yourself out. So this is some exam where you need to go with a fresh mind. So
Any
don't accumulate.
precautions like that? Like, did you carry the NTS? Do you want to give any tips to the candidates just before
Yeah.
the exam? What are the things they need to do? And should they go to the Prometric also once and check how much distance is the Prometric with their place and all? Do you think that is very important also and one of the important part?
Yeah, so for the it's important that, so you don't have to. Prometric allows you to take a mock test there, so just to get a feel. I did not do that because AICPA itself gives. Yeah, AICPA gives those sample test papers, so you don't have to really go to Prometric and see the testing environment. That is not important, because you can always schedule an appointment with them and take a mock with them. with Prometric. That is also allowed,
That
which
is
is there.
something
I think
we are not aware. So you can schedule with Prometric and you can write a mock test also there.
yes, you can do a mock over there. I think it's just for a very short time, but you can still get a feel of how the exam center is and what are the things you need to do and all that. But you need to schedule one.
Advice. Okay.
Okay, but I did not do that, but I definitely did walk up to Prometric just to know that where the place is, and so that I know I don't have to take a lot of stress on the exam day. A few things to remember. One, since we are Indian students and we have to take an international examination, we need to go with our identification, so which will be a passport and any other, if you have a driving license, then well and good. Calculator was one big concern for me because the calculator which is there in the software for examination, it's not a very user-friendly one because you need to be really fast when you're calculating. So you can always ask for a calculator and you will get one. At least that is what happens in the US centers. You can ask for a calculator and you can get a calculator. Then for scratch paper and pen, always request for one because otherwise you get a marker and a board which is erasable. It's always better to have a scratch paper and pen to work out these questions because we are more used to it than having to use a marker and eraser. So uh, these are few things which I can remember: calculator, the scratch pencil, then your identification proof, mm, and yeah, these are the points I remember for the Prometric, which you can be ready for on that examination day.
Okay. So how these testlets are, like how many MCQs are tested in regulation and how
Okay.
many testlets are of sims?
Okay, to take you through the exam structure, there are totally 5 testlets. First 2 are multiple choice and last 3 are task-based simulations. So each multiple choice testlet has 38 questions each, 38 into 2, 76 questions of multiple choice. And last 3 testlets, like I mentioned, it's simulation. In that, one is of 2 questions, the other 2 are of 3 questions each. So totally 2 plus 3 plus 3, 8 questions in simulations. So both carry a 50% weightage. So
Do you have a
uh,
break in between after the MCQs? Can we go out and kind of relax and drink water and come back, or how did you do that actually?
there is one where the clock stops. So when I say clock stops, this is a total of 4-hour paper. So after every testlet, you can take a break, but the clock still keeps ticking. So you will lose time. So rather, you would sit back on your chair, take the exam for the first, second, and third testlet. Then there is a break of 15 minutes wherein the clock stops. You can go out. I always suggest carry something to eat and drink because you are really tired. So it's always nice if you can carry something to refresh yourself, eat and drink, re-energize, come back for the last 2 tests because those are also very important. So again, time is very important. The more and more you practice mock papers, you will understand how well you'll be able to manage time. Because honestly, I made a mistake because I started panicking during my second test. It was not very easy. So if I have to give you the perfect standard time, it'll be the first 3 testlets you need to finish in 2 hours, and the last 2 testlets you keep 2 more hours. But for me, I think I overrun time and I started worrying about it and panicking, which is not a very good thing because you don't perform really well in simulations. You need more time to do your simulations. So make sure you finish the first 3 testlets in 2 hours, take the 15 minutes break, and come back again for the last 2 testlets for another 2 more hours.
Okay, so you're telling last 2 testlets we need to devote almost half the time because there are almost 6 simulations there.
Exactly. There's 6 simulations and you can give 20 minutes each for each simulation. So that will be a perfect time management for it. Because if I have to break the time, 45 minutes for first testlet, 45 minutes for the second testlet, that's 1.5 hours. Third testlet has only 2 questions, so 15 minutes each. Then take a break of 15 minutes and then last 2 testlets of 2 hours. You can have each question for 20 minutes. When you have that with you, you are in a very good shape. And the thing is, reason is when you submit a testlet, you cannot really come back to it. You need that is submitted and it's over once and for all. So you need time to actually go back and just see that
And
what you've done is.
some students have asked me, like, can you skip one in a testlet? One sim, can you skip it? Second sim, you'd solve it and again go back to the first sim and solve it till you haven't submitted the entire testlet. But if you're not getting a simulation, so can you just skip that and go to the next question and then come back to the previous question?
Yeah, so that is allowed. So as long as you have one testlet with you, you can go in any order. You can go, because there are times where in the MCQs, when I felt the questions were getting tougher, I went to the last question of the testlet. There are things which you can do. As long as you don't submit the testlet, you can go from front, back, middle, anything is fine. So you can go in any order. You need not follow one particular order. So if you have a, say example, you have the fourth testlet, which has 3 questions for, and you can do 1 or 2 or 3 in any order you can do it. Once you submit it, it's submitted. You cannot go back to it.
So one last question, I think. We had such an excellent conversation. I think this should be one of the finest videos I have done, at least. So I'll put one question for sure. What do you think? How a chartered accountant's experience and how a CPA experience for you so far?
I won't be sued by the Indian
No,
ICA,
you
right?
won't. No, definitely. I want an honest, candid answer. Actually,
Okay,
how do you
so
think US tax and Indian tax was like? What do you think
okay,
is
so
more challenging for you, and in quality terms also? I think, see, we learn from the West and West learns from the East, right? So it,
okay, so honestly, one ICA, the Indian Chartered Accountant Direct Tax paper, at least when I wrote it, it was a completely subjective paper. I think right now they have multiple choices coming in. They have started that concept. But when we took a paper, it was a completely subjective paper. But here, it's not a subjective paper, it's objective paper where you have MCQs. And even in the simulation, what I felt that if your answer is wrong, it's wrong. All the step markings, all the steps that you did in those working sheets that you have, it's not counted. So as long as your answer is wrong, it's wrong. So here, it demands for more conceptual clarity than what you have in ICI, because ICI, I know you get marks for steps. They're only very, if you're very unlucky, is when you don't get marks for steps. The second thing what I felt is here you're dealing with more on tax returns, because if you see in CPA, what happens is the questions are all based on individual tax return, or what happens in a corporate, or how those calculation happens, which we don't do in ICA. In ICA, I don't remember having a single question on returns. It was just random questions on calculation of tax, but we have nothing. We have not dealt with any. So if any person wants to take up tax as their profession, it's more easier when you take up a CPA US exam than having to have just Indian CA, because in Indian CA, that is where we lack. We know how to compute, but how to go about a return, I'm sure many of us don't know when it comes to especially corporates and partnerships, etc. So that is something which we learn in the US CPA. So this is a major difference I found for taxation. Yeah, so but taxation is a vast topic. I'm sure even this is not the end of it. Regulation is just a small portion of it. There are many topics that they must have left, but it was a good experience for one paper. Rest 3 more to go.
no, I think, Sharon, thank you so much for giving your time. And students out there, please keep subscribed, share the video so that a lot of the students kind of benefit. I think Sharon is there on LinkedIn also. I think Sharon has just created a LinkedIn account. You can reach her on LinkedIn as well. And you can also comment on the video, I guess, and we can keep answering up. And I think Sharon can also answer on the queries which keeps coming up on the video. Thank you so much, Sharon. It was a
Thank
wonderful
you.
conversation with you. I think ICA will not beat me for this, but I would learn from the West. I think they are all best practices in the world, how they are doing it. And it's always good for all of us to kind of learn from various best practices and all. Right. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thanks.
Thank you, Sripal. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.